I'm Laura Ingraham, and this is the Ingraham Angle from Washington tonight. General Mark Milley has exposed himself to possible charges under multiple provisions of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. We're going to lay them out for you tonight. Also, polls in California, the recall election, close at the bottom of our hour. Could there be any surprises? A report from the ground later tonight. And what do AOC and Fauci have in common? I'll reveal. But first, General Milley's insurrection. That's the focus of tonight's angle. All year long, Democrats and Trump haters have clung to the events of January 6th with a white-knuckled death grip. They claim a riot that the Capitol Police should have been prepared for was actually an insurrection, the shortest in world history, by the way. But today we learn the truth. There was indeed an insurrection being planned around that time in Washington, but it took place at the Pentagon, and its chief architect was General Mark Milley. In a new book by Bob Woodward and Robert Acosta, we learned that Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, jumped the chain of command and then essentially installed himself, an unelected military officer, as the nation's commander-in-chief. Milley was overseeing the mobilization of America's national security state without the knowledge of the American people or the rest of the world. Some might contend that Milley had overstepped his authority, but he believed his actions were in good faith, a precaution to ensure that there was no historic rupture in the international order, no accidental war with China or others, and no use of nuclear weapons. Notice the framing. Yes, he may have violated both the military code and the Constitution, but it was all in good faith, grounded in good intentions for the international order. Now, what an arrogant, imperious boob. But none of us should be surprised about Milley. He's always craved acceptance and approval from the elites. Most evident when he issued that embarrassing on-cam apology in June 2020 for having walked across Lafayette Square with President Trump during the BLM unrest.
That sparked a national debate about the role of the military in civil society. I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics. As a commissioned, uniformed officer, it was a mistake that I have learned from.
You've learned nothing, sir. In fact, getting involved in domestic politics is exactly what you did 6 months after that embarrassing performance. If Milley was so gravely concerned about what he saw and heard from President Trump, okay, he should have resigned his position. Instead, if these reports are accurate, he chose not only to violate his chain of command, but to have separate track conversations with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, on January 8th about the nuclear football. She asked Milley what precautions are available to prevent an unstable president from initiating military hostilities or from accessing launch codes and ordering a nuclear strike. Milley assured her that there were a lot of checks in the system. Pelosi then told Milley, "Trump's crazy. You know he's crazy. He's crazy. And what he did yesterday is further evidence of his craziness." Milley replied, "I agree with you on everything." Well, nutbag Nancy wanted him to confiscate the nuclear launch codes, denying President Trump the ability to wage war. Although Milley reportedly waved her off, it doesn't matter. By simply having that conversation, Milley thrust himself into a political role to which he was not elected. As a commissioned officer, Milley answers to his commander-in-chief, not to Pelosi or Schumer or a foreign leader. Speaking of which, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire issue involves Milley's secret conversations before the election with world leaders, including his Chinese counterpart. One call took place on October 30th, 2020, 4 days before the election. "General Lee, I want to assure you that the American government is stable and everything is going to be okay. You and I have known each other for 5 years now. If we're going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time. It's not going to be a surprise." Okay. I don't care what he thought Trump might do. Milley had zero authority to make these phone calls. In the absence of a specified unlawful order by President Trump, Milley was engaged in potentially treasonous conduct. He took on the political role that he had decried in his June 2020 apology. Of course, the media spent most of today blocking and tackling for Milley. Because, let's face it, any enemy of Trump is a friend of theirs.
He seems to be the greatest patriot that was on duty during the previous administration. I have to say, is emerging as a pretty important and heroic American figure in this era.
I don't blame General Milley for any of this, in as much as I blame Donald Trump.
He felt he couldn't trust Trump and needed to take all necessary precautions to prevent him from doing something dangerous.
Weeks ago, I was the first in the media to call for Milley to step down over his role in the deadly Afghanistan withdrawal. Today, these revelations were enough to push Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, and others to call for Milley's firing as well. Good for them. And after 4 years, think about this, of liberal journalists squawking that Trump was like a tyrant, authoritarian figure, he demanded personal loyalty of everyone who worked for him, Woodward writes that it was Milley who demanded allegiance, not to the U.S. military code or the Constitution, but to himself. During the final days of the Trump White House, he allegedly said to his top officers, no matter what you're told, you do the procedure, you do the process, and I'm part of that procedure. He then went around the room, looked each officer in the eye, and asked them to verbally confirm they understood. Milley considered it an oath. As the Angle has noted on many occasions, the U.S. military needs a top-down reform. Led by generals like Milley, our military, the best equipped in the world, hasn't won a major war outright since World War II. It's been marred by one failure after another. Failures not due to the valiant efforts of our enlisted men and women, but due to their leadership, which has become a woke joke. In recent weeks, they've been exposed as either incompetent, corrupt, or both. From the appalling Afghanistan withdrawal to the Chinese humiliation of our diplomatic corps, we've seen an administration just totally adrift, and a Democrat Party unwilling to level with the American people about the stark danger we're in as a result of this ineptitude. Among today's military leadership, political correctness, diversity, inclusion, they're more fervently prized and studied than any plan for victory on the battlefield or at an airport. As for punishment for Milley, he should be court-martialed and dishonorably discharged for his role in what was a lot closer to an insurrection than anything we saw on January 6th. And that's The Angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.